Now tonight, we're going to have Margeigh talk about politeness, which is, there's the joke about the professor who always studies the one thing that they're missing in their own life. So I've gotten much more interested in politeness theory, very belatedly. And I would love to have us learn from what Margeigh explored when she was working on like the early versions of Cortana and even before that. So in the hopes that she can share that rather than have me talk, let me give the stage to Margeigh.
Thank you, Paul. Thank everyone here for making it out on this rainy night. I can't believe there's an audience here at all, so you guys are awesome. Thanks. Just going to dive in. Every 4 years in the small German town of Kassel, they host an international art exhibition called Documenta. It takes over all the public spaces and many of its non-public spaces. In 2003, I stood in a very long line in the town square waiting to enter the main gallery space. The line wasn't moving very fast because at the main entrance, exhibition staff were screening purses and backpacks as a security precaution. As I got closer, I realized that the reason the line was moving so slowly was that the bag checkers were chatting with everybody as they tried to examine the bags, and that they really didn't seem to be paying too much of attention to what was in the bag or really scrutinizing what people had. And then they were trying to fit bags into an oversized, or into fitting bags into a bag checker and really like helping the people fit them in the bag checker, like just pushing them in. When it was my turn, after a long wait, I was drawn into the same kind of conversation. They were very chatty. They did the same thing with my bag. And everyone before and after me, I got to hear the conversation. It was very focused on the person. It wasn't a generic conversation, and the entire wait in the line was a fantastic experience as a result. Turned out this was the first piece of art that I saw at Documenta. It was a brilliant and utterly invisible piece by an artist named Anna Pravaki. Her installation was a result of weeks of training Documenta staff. She trained them in the people from the town and people from the Documenta community in the ways of hospitality and the tactics of grace, as she called it. These were insights she first learned from her mother and later perfected with a collaborator, Irina Arshtikova. And now I'm going to show you a clip that was part of the pre-work for this exhibit.
Hi.
Hi.
Here to see the exhibit?
Oh, okay. Well, we have a permanent collection, and we also have what we call our distinctive artist series. So, Vertuhi, how can we make the situation more comfortable?
Anna, usually this happens when one is overexcited.
So it's not really something you can control?
No.
I think the main thing is not to make each other feel embarrassed.
You know, not a big deal at all.
Would you like a tissue?
Okay.
Well, enjoy the museum.
I will.
I loved the Greeting Committee, this series of videos, which you can find on Vimeo, but I loved it because it was so closely related to work I'd been doing at Microsoft for, at the same time, or for the past couple of years. So tonight I'm going to be sharing some of what I learned through doing this work. But first I'm going to just tiny little bit of background. The talk's about machine learning, but I'm not a data scientist. I'm merely a designer. And for most of my career, I worked as a design consultant, creating interfaces for consumer products and entertainment platforms in particular. And with traditional consumer products, it was possible and typical, really, to communicate product vision by making drawings and executing animations. It's possible in traditional product design to be really specific about every aspect of user experience. and exactly what happens when the user does X, Y, or Z. So when I left consulting to join Bing Mobile, where I led the design team for a couple of years, I expected to be kind of continuing in the same vein, and I did for a little bit. But a couple years in, it sort of became clear that the future of search was not going to be about typing queries into text boxes. We began to realize that in the age of ubiquitous sensing, connected devices, real-time signal processing, and predictive modeling, all of a sudden it was possible to consider search experience that was much more personalized and possibly extremely different from the search interfaces that we're accustomed to. So the question from a user experience perspective became how to get our heads around this new problem, this new old problem. So we returned to first principles and to what's going through the mind of the user as they sit down to do a search. So the model we came up with was this idea that sort of this, obvious thing, really, that every time we sit down to do a search, we're in one of these states. Either we know exactly what we want, or we know something about what we want, or we think the crowd can help us find what we want, or we need help of some other kind finding what we want. And these aren't user types. These are states of mind that any of us go through, multiple times a day. The other thing we realized was the missing piece. Those were the pieces that were showing up in search interfaces at that time, but the missing piece were the last two on the end, where potentially it was possible to be delivering search results for when somebody's in a state of mind of not even knowing what they want at all, or not even knowing they want something or need something. So with this model, we started to look at, kind of just to break things down and get our heads around it, we looked at what the difference is between each of these states of mind. And on the far left, where the user knows exactly what they want, it really demands an experience that is driven by the user. And in the middle of the spectrum, where the user's getting help or there's some sort of back and forth between the user and the system, it really needs to be about a back and forth or a shared interaction between the user and the system. And then on the far right, where you have no idea what you want, or even if you want anything or need anything, it really has to be system-driven because the user's not aware and therefore can't be driving. And it turns out that as you move from one end of the spectrum to another, different things matter, or different things win. So on the left-hand side of the spectrum, obviously efficiencies, what it's all about. If I know exactly what I want to get in and get out as quickly as possible without any hand-holding from the system. In the middle of the spectrum, it's about if I have to go back and forth with the system frequently or a lot, it's really got to be a pleasant experience. It's got to be an engaging experience and something that is about building rapport. And on the right hand, or your right hand side of the spectrum, when you don't know anything about what you want, it really has to be that the system is smart enough and knows you well enough to deliver something that's truly inspiring. Because anything less than inspiring, it would be a terrible user experience. So starting with this framing, we started thinking about, okay, well, whoops. There we go. So we began to, sorry, let me catch up with myself here. So just because we were on the design side, we were assuming, and we're in a technology group and had Bing as a search engine, sort of the engine behind anything we might do. We had to, in order to get our head around it, we kind of had to assume that we would have the capability eventually or soon to make accurate inferences, that we would have sufficient and compelling content to deliver as a result of these inferences that we were making, and that we would have the mechanisms, signals, and contextual awareness, basically, to be able to deliver content in a timely and relevant manner. So we set out to since this is kind of new ground, and we couldn't draw it. We couldn't sit at our desks and try to figure out what this new search experience might be like. Our process was to kludge together these crazy bunch of third-party tools and third-party products into kind of a Frankenstein system. We built several of these where we use basically wherever we didn't have algorithms, we put humans. So basically, if we needed an algorithm that predicted when to send a piece of content, we put a human in the loop. When we needed an algorithm to determine which kind of content was better for one of our users, we put a human in the loop. And we use this method as a way of quick and dirty prototyping of very complex systems. And we made a series of these, I think 10 different experiments altogether. And each experiment was focused on learning or answering a different set of questions. So I'm just going to kind of give you a high-level overview of the big takeaways from what was probably a year and a half of work. Okay, so for probably many of you in the audience, this is going to be a knowledge you already have, but I'm just going to say it as premise. So in any intelligent system where the objective is to predict what the user will want, the predictive algorithms need some amount of information about the user in order to start to work effectively. And data scientists call this the cold start problem. On day one, when they start out, there just isn't enough information about the user to do any kind of personalized experience at all. Even if the algorithm is awesome and they're sure that once they have that information, it'll be, doing all the right things. On day one, there's just the problem of how do you get that seed information. There are a couple of solutions to the cold start problem, and you might recognize them in some of the products that you've used or even abandoned, potentially. One solution is to start with no information and to use input the user provides, clicks and ratings, as well as background tracking to slowly gather the information needed to make personal and valuable predictions. This strategy can result in a why bother experience for the user because the product is supposed to be smart, but if it takes so long to, for a user to experience the value or reap the benefit, then they're likely to give up. Second solution is to ask the user for every piece of information that the algorithm needs. This is a very transparent approach, and people, take this approach for that reason sometimes. And it allows the personalization to happen faster. But often it's so tedious for the user that they drop off even sooner than with the first solution. Now, third solution is to use digital exhaust from other sites or related products so that on day one, the system already knows a lot about the user. Of course, this experience tends to be really scary for the user. So from the kinds of design experiments that I mentioned before, we thought there has to be a fourth solution. We have to figure out how you get the information that you need to be intelligent without freaking the user out or making it too much work for them. We came up with this other solution, which we ended up calling the warm ramp, which has kind of it's a phased approach and has kind of 3 distinct phases, which I'll describe. On day one, as part of the out-of-the-box experience or the setup experience, the user reveals a small amount of information, the key pieces of data that the algorithm needs in order to kind of get its momentum going. In the first phase, the personalization is always noticeable, but ideally triggered by context only. This first phase is about establishing credibility and showing that the information provided results in better content. So that once credibility is established and the user is seeing clear relationship between the information they provide and the value they receive, they become more willing to offer more information to the system. And the more information that's offered, the better the predictive algorithms begin to work. And eventually, there's a point at which the system has learned most of what it needs to know about the user, and the personalization capability starts to level out. At this point, and from then on, it really becomes driven more opportunistically. Oops. The amount more of information the system can learn about the user, or the amount of content the system can deliver. In this warm ramp approach, the key insight probably was that the system may actually know more than what it's letting on. That may be restraining itself, not trying to show off, not trying to be too smart too soon, is a good strategy, because in the experimentation we did, people needed to test the waters before they would trust the system with more information, even if the system was capable of doing more. In the second phase, the system kind of changes gear. It's proved itself. Hopefully the user's using it regularly. And if the algorithms are doing a good job, there'll be kind of an inflection point, which you see, where the user starts to even give the system credit for more than it actually knows, or more than it can actually do. And that would be the goal of this second phase, is to make the user feel empowered and really overconfident, maybe, even in the system. And then over time, the user and the system actually gain a more, they come to tighter parity about but the user understands what the system can deliver, and the system understands what it needs to know, pretty much all about the user. If this sounds familiar, there's a reason. The warm ramp was modeled after the way that two people who don't know each other come to develop a relationship over time. At the beginning, they don't trust each other or even necessarily put a great deal of stock in the relationship. Trust and value really grow together in distinct phases over time. And there's a lot of literature to suggest that the extent to which the system attempts to communicate proactively with the user means that this is even more true. And when the interface of a system like this is embodied in any way, like Allo or Alexa or Cortana or Siri, the onus on observing social protocols is even greater. So when a system presents it as an agent, itself as an agent, all of the prevailing roles of social engagement apply and should be observed between the user and the system. One aspect of which is when people who are getting to know one another have a tendency, or it's an unconscious reaction of showing interest, is to start to mirror one another or start to adapt. Ideally, both are trying to adapt more to the behavior of one another. We played around with kind of a very late experiment. We played around with this. We took a linguistic theory, which has to do with different styles of conversation, different conversational styles, which are reflected in level of animation, number of the words you use, pitch rate, pitch range, the formality or informality of the language used. And we tried to model that, make the system, see if a system could model these, detect and model these different attributes of engagement with the user, and whether or not it resulted in higher level engagement. And the preliminary take was that there was potential here. Definitely needs some development. Okay, so that was all theory. That was all just kind of the foundational design layer that then took a couple of years. But at Microsoft, this was right at the time where they were deciding that they needed a system like Siri or, well, Alexa wasn't there yet, but they needed their version of Google Now and/or Siri. So it came time to put this kind of theory to practice. And so the next couple of case studies, I'm just going to go through how we looked at or how we broke down different aspects of the warm ramp. So as I showed before, in the lower left, we have our same kind of value graph. And a key piece of this is getting some critical piece of information right off the bat. So the user's first run experience is a key moment. And the out-of-box experience is a ripe opportunity because the user's excited to get into the product and at that moment kind of willing to do whatever they need to do in order to engage. So for V1 of Cortana, which was on Windows Phone 8, my team created a short little get-to-know-you feature. In this feature, the system asks 4 really indirect questions, kind of like a new acquaintance might. And the questions are really intentionally designed to beat around the bush. And the answers that are the options are not supposed to be sensitive. They're supposed to be just kind of amusing to answer, sort of like a Cosmo quiz. Then the system uses predictive algorithms to make inferences about the user based on the combination of answers that they provided. In the audience with us tonight is Lisa Pessensen, who is a key contributor to this project, and she has she brought a cognitive science and user research background, and she can answer really hard questions about this during the Q&A. She'll join me up here. So once we had established this as a key piece of the out-of-box experience for the US and Canadian market, the problem of localization, of course, reared its head. And this kind of thing is super challenging for, for a feature that relies on not offending people or finding the right, striking the right note, tone in the questions. We wanted to make sure that we had it right. So we immediately went out and did research in 5 other markets. And we use this research opportunity to really validate in other markets or expand in some ways our theory of the warm ramp. Did everybody that we talked to kind of have the same kind of model for how relationships evolve, and where were their differences? And we know there's a lot of research that say that personal data that people share or data that's personal and sensitive in one country can be very different from the data that's sensitive in another country. And so as we move from market to market, it was really important to understand what toes we might be stepping on. And so we did a lot of work to help nail down these questions for the additional international markets. And sort of stepping back, it's kind of all well and good to come up with a model like this, but unless you can explain it or document it in a way that developers and executives can understand, you can't go any further with it. It's like it's design you can't draw, right? So you have to build it in some way to communicate the power of it. Whoops. So that's what we did. We did another effort was building basically an end-to-end embodiment of the warm ramp. And it was a demo app that anyone could use and really experience, in real time and over time, the benefits of this approach. So I'm just going to show you a quick animation that summarizes how it worked. But just to let you know, we built the whole thing, the rules engine, all the algorithms in the background, and we made a functional app to prove that it could be done. So that was quick, so I'm just going to recap. So the main things we were trying to show here are that right from the get-go, we had some key pieces of information, and we were very transparent about asking for it directly. We were very transparent about, we had a visual inference system, so any inference that the system made showed up as something like a badge, and over time you gathered these inferences and you were able to click in, and if you didn't want to be known as sporty, or you didn't want sporty to be influencing the recommendations you get, it's up to you. You can get rid of that thing. The idea of the system was we just picked a data stream. We had a lot that was a great, robust data stream, which was events. So we set the algorithms to work on an events recommendations. So the app would return a list of events, and on the fourth screen over, in some cases, so we got signal from whether people saved or deleted events, but also we got additional signal when they took the trouble to rate stuff. And whenever they rated something high, we added dinner and drinks recommendations near wherever they were going. And then, of course, we sent them invites for both the dinner and the event into their calendar. So again, this kind of concrete, demo of the system makes all the hand-waving unnecessary, and it makes it's a way that designers can begin to engage with kind of get under the hood, engage with the drivers of these kinds of experience, like really understand the limits and the possibilities, but also it allows us to demonstrate in higher fidelity what the user experience we're after is really all about. And then kind of going on to the kind of the middle of the warm ramp. And again, the warm ramp is really based on this kind of conversational model of a give and take between the system and the user. And one of the modes of conversation is banter. And we found after Windows Phone, the first version of Cortana on Windows Phone, that one of the main things people like to do with Cortana was just mess with her. Of course, you've probably seen, all the list of things you can ask Siri or Cortana. And so we took one of the things that was most frequently asked, which was, "What's up, Cortana?" And started to think about, well, what can you do with that situation where the user is clearly focused on the phone, they're killing time, how can we use that as a learning opportunity? So I can't show you these, but we developed a a couple of games, a couple of interactions that allowed, again, allowed kind of by this indirect reasoning or reading between the lines, allowed the system to not learn directly about stuff about the user, but to start to put different pieces of information together in order to make inferences in the background. So it was an opportunistic way of being able to learn. All right, and then in the last phase of the warm ramp, this is like the most critical thing, because if you've gotten through the first two phases, now you're in a sustainability mode. You have to figure out how do you keep their attention over time, because a product like Cortana, which is really a new interface on a search engine, you don't want them to ever stop using this thing, right? And so how do you keep that experience fresh? And it turns out that this is really a content problem. The system can only, well, one of our principles, design principles, was that the system has no business learning stuff about you that doesn't result in higher value to them. So we shouldn't be asking for information or going after information that we didn't have better content to deliver as a result. So it really became about looking at actual users' interests, and realizing that in that third phase, we really had to figure out a way to do what I'm calling the long tail of you, which is that, yes, I have typical genres of information. I have interest in health and parenting and travel and work and home and all that. But if you drill down another layer or another layer from that, the data that the system has on me becomes incredibly much more nuanced potentially. And really, if the system's trying to be personalized truly and really trying to get to know me over time, then the content that it delivers really has to be at the same level of nuance. So we set out to try and, it's a completely different aspect of the user experience problem, but we set out to try to figure out where would that nuanced content come from. It would be a completely unscalable solution to have curators curating, niche content feeds on every topic. So we worked with, we got together with a third-party content provider aggregator who was able to provide, through their magic, content feeds, automatically generated content feeds on virtually any niche topic that we could come up with, literally any niche topic. And these feeds were automatically generated and dynamically refreshing. So it was like an awesome partnership. And so we learned not only that we could find scalable niche content, but that by parsing these niche feeds, so for example, if I'm a fisherman, I might really appreciate a niche feed about fly fishing, let's say. By parsing a feed about fly fishing, we start to discover like the dialect and the vocabulary of fly fishermen, which is distinct from the neutral, like the dictionary, like the level of word, the frequency of word usage in, that's the general model, differs for every different interest domain. So, which is interesting, because then if we could tell words that have higher frequency for fly fishermen, we can start to infer that someone might be a fly fisherman because they use the same set of words more frequently. But the other completely unexpected byproduct of this was that by parsing these niche feeds, we came up with crazy, unexpected correlations between fly fishing, for example, and like musicians that fly fishermen, care about. So they fish, it's funny, but Thelonious Monk, it's like and then elsewhere we see more jazz correlations. So completely unexpected. We see like products that are mentioned. We see places that are important for fly fishermen. So I'm using them as an example, but in theory, it could be any niche. You know, it could be model trains people. It could be, you know, anything you can think of. So ended up being really interesting, I thought. And just kind of to circle back to where I started, the most interesting thing for me out of all of this last couple of years of design is that, you know, I've moved from this very contained and very easy to present sort of approach to what a user experience might be, and into this thing which Lisa can attest to. We spent so much more of our time in spreadsheets looking at, you know, 12-digit numbers, trying to figure out how you could get them to move one way or another, and how to read them to understand, you know, what that level of prediction might mean. And we found, that our data scientist friends really appreciated this. They, in many cases, didn't really understand what might be valuable or what wasn't so valuable, or they might be looking for a really high rate of prediction for a certain kind of inference, and by bringing the user perspective, we could offer advice, and say stuff like, oh, well, you know, that's okay that's low, because it'll be a good thing even if we get it wrong. Or, yeah, we don't, you know, that one's got to be really high, because if we get it wrong, that would be a horrible outcome. That would be a terrible user reaction. So that's the kind of stuff that data scientists are never going to be able to do effectively. And I feel like it's a, you know, huge opportunity for designers to be able to engage at this level, and to be able to, I mean, right now, I just feel like it's a very super exciting time for design, because, you know, we have the opportunity to establish, we're right at the, you know, cutting edge, really, of how these intelligent systems and users are going to engage. And I think designers have a super critical role to play in that, in how this intelligence, AI, is either adopted or rejected in the next few years. So with that, let's start some Q&A, and I'm going to have Lisa come up and join me here.
Start with one. Thank you, Margeigh. That was so interesting. Can you say a little bit more about how you use those third-party feeds? Like exactly where the information, say, from fly fishermen shows up besides, you know, like in the pipe? Are you showing that back to customers by quoting it? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, so I mean, this presentation is still a little bit abstract, but imagine that Cortana had discovered that you were a fly fisherman. Cortana's pushing cards to you all the time, just like Google now, right? So there's no reason that feed of you know, what's happening in fly fishing today couldn't appear when you know, get there in the morning. The other way we saw it working was we piloted this actually in the Bing desktop experience, where anything, you know, Bing's quite far behind Google in terms of being able to, you know, they just don't have the data yet, the equivalent data. So it's actually really hard to come up with, the more niche a search query is, it's harder to come up with like really compelling results. So this kind of newsfeed thing was a really great way to, if we had that in the background and we could detect that what you're after is you're searching on IoT or searching on something that maybe Bing didn't know a lot about. This third-party feed could generate a feed on IoT and put it in the sidebar or put it at the top of the search results. So it was a different way to augment the search results.
Hi, thank you. One question I have is maybe a cog-sci kind of question. When you're doing these warm ramp-ups and you're having sort of some soft questioning, like in the screenshot you had, like what are your pick two activities at night or something?
Yeah.
Like when you're writing these, that's somewhat of a conversational UI, even if there's no AI behind it.
Yeah.
Like, did you notice or do you consider like how aspiration, it's typical sort of survey writing or people describing themselves, and like how much of this is aspiration versus reality, and how that influences, like, is that part of the algorithm, is to recognize, oh, well, most people are going to say that they do this, but really they don't, and can the system adapt to that?
We definitely talked about this, but I think we ended up feeling like it didn't matter because it wasn't the answers that we were after. It was the patterns of the answers. So over 4 questions, and you've picked 8 things. Those 8 things are a constellation that if you have enough people, those constellations have meaning, whether or not independent of the content. Right?
You sort of triangulate someone. You don't need them. Okay, and then I guess a bigger scope question is, you've discovered that I like fly fishing, and I guess maybe this is related to the value of discovering via my own work versus something being just shown to me. And I'm wondering if if you noticed that people responded differently overall to just having information presented to them versus the kind that they put some work in through traditional search to get the result, and if there's any kind of different valuation of that?
Yes, absolutely. So even if we had determined, well, it depends on the stage of the relationship. So in the first stage, absolutely we would, even if we were certain you were a fly fisherman, we would not be pushing anything about fly fishing, because in that stage you want to, it's almost like just gaining confidence by being credible. It's not about shock and awe at all, right? It's about restraint. But once in the second phase, where the user's saying, hey, yeah, I like this thing, I'm using it every day, or I'm using it somewhat regularly, you can take their cues. So if they're doing queries on something related to fly fishing, you can easily, in context, follow up with a, hey, did you know we have this, you want news every day about fly fishing? You don't come out of the blue. You wait for the opportunity and surface it in context, and then it's actually kind of invisible and completely palatable to the user in that way. Oops.
Hi. You framed this as searching about information about something.
Uh-huh.
Suppose that there was controversy about the nature of fly fishing, and how would the warm ramp deal with where there's not a clear answer, but there's an answer based on the person's interests, suppositions, prior history, and there's pros and cons that need to be negotiated? What would happen in those circumstances when it's just not a clear-cut answer?
Well, I'm trying to think of an example of what you're saying. Maybe politics is an example?
Politics is a great example. I was
Okay.
But, we can keep it to fly fishing and suppose that they like to have tied flies or manufactured flies. I don't know. But,
Okay, well, I'll go. The fly fishing answer is we're agnostic. So the way that these feeds are generated, I should go into this. It's fascinating, their technology, these guys. But the way these feeds are generated is that they have scraped the Twitter sphere for years and have figured out the influencers, or can figure out the influencers on any topic whatsoever based on hashtags. So they can say, if I want to feed on fly fishing, they can say, okay, well, here are the biggest influencers in fly fishing based on the fact that all these other people are always retweeting them. They're retweeting each other. They're always have the highest volume of likes. All these signals, they basically create a mojo for these fly fishing influencers, stack rank them, and then whatever they're doing today is displayed according to the stack ranking. So we wouldn't take a side on anything. We would just present it whatever it was.
I wasn't thinking about your side of the information. It was a person's in a dialogue with the system and doesn't know how they feel about something. They can get led in one direction or the other. You're agnostic to the direction, but what direction do they end up in?
Okay, well, let's see. So all of the stuff we presented presumes that there's a feedback loop. So if you're seeing stuff that you really hate, then you can send all the signal you want to get to eliminate that kind of stuff. And of course, it's on the the onus is on the system to understand what it is about that thing that you're really hating. But over time, you would start to see patterns of things. Like one example was, in the event recommender, I might really, I might be, I love the women's basketball, at Stanford game, and I hate, the men's basketball. Like it's like I'm interested in women's basketball, but I'm not interested in basketball all up, right? So it can start to distinguish based on all the other metadata associated with the thing that I'm accepting or rejecting.
Could you say, I was going to ask one question about like the unscalable part, so the part that is handwritten rather than algorithmic. Did you both have experiences writing stuff just to get the conversation rolling? Can you talk about that?
Yes, we did. You want to?
No, go ahead. I mean, wasn't it more the original research?
You have to get closer to the mic, please.
Give you a mic. You got to tell us. 3 examples.
She knows already. Tell us.
I did more of the work with the researchers who were creating the machine learning algorithms that were doing that triangulation, that were learning from the large numbers of people that were answering this, just the few questions. But we did that Wizard of Oz prototyping where we were using humans instead of the machine. A lot of that was done prior to this project with Margeigh's group, and that was a lot of they were doing some text messaging.
We had a whole team of writers
through text.
Yeah.
And so that was supposed to be an AI, but it was really people. And then with the machine learning on the algorithms, we did a Wizard of Oz prototype where we tried to understand how people would react to an AI that was very conversational, that would try to start some banter with you and understand their impressions and really see how close we could get to the uncanny valley before people started feeling uncomfortable with the AI. So really quick, one thing we did was we told people they were speaking with an AI, and it was actually me with a slightly robotic voice. The most difficult part of which was to not laugh while I spoke with them. But it was fantastic. We had a moderator who they could speak to if they were having trouble with me, because I would try to be classically somewhat, difficult, but still approach some of these topics that they may not have been expecting. So in this way, we were able to get some of those impressions of how this would be were it out in the real world without having a prototype or having something functional.
Another question. I think this will be our last question.
Sure.
You talked about feedback, so it's a user interface for a search engine, yes? Or
Yes.
Does it know when you stop a searching session whether you're satisfied
I don't know that it knows any more than a regular search engine would know.
Now, wouldn't that be important?
Yes, but then you would have the opportunity to say, I mean, unlike a traditional search engine, you could say, hey, you know, I'm stumped. I don't have any idea.
Because for a speech, I was trying to find out how much oxygen a tree releases in a year. You would think with all the global warming and you know, environmental concern that would be a readily discoverable statistic or fact.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find it. I used Google Scholar. I used I mean, there was all sorts of arcane and sort of bizarre things, but you know, I couldn't find it per hectare, per year, per day, per one tree, per different, you know, deciduous, any of that kind of thing. I was like lost. So how could this system have helped me with that? Like, I would have liked to have said, look, overnight, you've watched my search patterns, you know my favorite search engines, you go find it out and give me the top 5 relevant results. Would what you're talking about have any avenue into that?
Yeah, I mean, so ideally, yes, I think we would all want what you're asking for, but I think the additional thing we could do short of that would be, wow, you just keep searching on the same thing, and you keep going, you keep drilling into these sites, and in the sites you're doing searches on the same thing. You could certainly recognize, if that activity was going through something like Cortana, it seems like we could recognize the fact that you keep looking and keep looking, keep looking, and have some sort of set of patterns that could trigger responses or trigger help of some kind.
Well, thank you. Let's give some feedback about the conversation to Lisa and Margeigh.